test. Jello. I don't think anyone's here yet. I don't know if anyone will come here. We better get going. Oh no, I didn't paste where I stopped. Individuals and classes. We talked about the farmers. Videos. I have these green. It's in the name of all taxation. Although it's spelled all weird. It's spelled like this. Brewery. Spelled like this. Although it's spelled all. Although it's spelled all weird. Yep. To keeping the to relieve the harder working farmers of all taxation. All right, that's where we ended. Maybe I say too much. Oh well. Welcome to the 95th episode of the Henry George Week Daily Devotional that is strong. We continue halfway through chapter 3 of The Effect Upon Individuals and Classes in Book 9, Effects of the Remedy being the Single Land Value Tax. We are reading Progress and Poverty by Henry George. He writes, "But the great gain of the working farmer can be seen only when the effect upon the distribution of population is considered. The destruction of speculative land values would tend to diffuse population where it is too dense and to concentrate it where it is too sparse. To substitute for the tenement house, homes surrounded by gardens, and fully to settle agricultural districts before people were driven far from neighbors to look for land." Of course, our situation is a little different with aggressive zoning and the massive suburban sprawl, where everyone above George's Wedge is able to have their little suburban home. Above George's Wedge, meaning they are landowners. Although we still have this weird blend of all these mortgaged homes where people are sort of just renting from the bank in this sort of hybrid style of land ownership. And then you have 40% of the United States population as renters. And they don't get homes surrounded by gardens, and they're basically still living in something not too different than tenement housing. George continues, "The people of the cities would thus get more of the pure air and sunshine of the country, the people of the country more of the economies and social life of the city. If, as is doubtless the case, the application of machinery tends to large fields, agricultural population will assume the primitive form and cluster in villages. The life of the average farmer is now unnecessarily dreary. He is not only compelled to work early and late, but he is cut off by the sparseness of population from the conveniences and amusements, the educational facilities, and the social and intellectual opportunities that come with the closer contact of man with man. He would be far better off in all these respects, and his labor would be far more productive if he and those around him held no more land than they wanted to use." We have a footnote. "Besides the enormous increase in the productive power of labor which would result from the better distribution of population, there would be also a similar economy in the productive power of land. The concentration of population in cities fed by the exhaustive circulation of large, sparsely populated areas, results in a literal draining into the sea of the elements of fertility. How enormous this waste is may be seen from the calculations that have been made as to the sewage of our cities, and its practical result is to be seen in the diminishing productiveness of agriculture in large sections. In a great part of the United States, we are steadily exhausting our lands. All right, I'm not super sure historically what these claims mean. I'm not familiar with the sewage systems of the late 1800s, but we definitely have a lot of sprawl nowadays, and sprawl is generally a pretty inefficient way of using land. We have less nearby green space, less green space in total. Yeah. Back from the footnote, George writes, while his children, as they grew up, would neither be so impelled to seek the excitement of a city, nor would they be driven so far away to seek farms of their own. Their means of living would be in their own hands and at home. Yeah, this is that funny thing. I mean, where sometimes people hear about Georgism and they're like, what about some little old widow living in her house getting evicted? And then you could combo the solution, which is A, that's not a, I feel bad for the little old lady, but she's not using that land very efficiently. I feel bad for all the homeless people who want to live somewhere. And then the question is, what happened to all of that little old lady's children? They probably had to move away to find somewhere they could afford to live. I know that many, many, many of my friends and families I grew up with have split up because the kids get married and move out of California to find somewhere that they can afford. And so then the old mom and dad have to pick where they want to retire to, one place or the other, one child or the other. Yeah. In short, the working farmer is both a laborer and a capitalist, as well as a landowner, and it is by his labor and capital that his living is made. His loss would be nominal, his gain would be real and great. Yes, if you weren't here for the last episode, we discussed the farmer. They often hear about land value tax and they're like, oh, I own a lot of land. That sounds horrible for me. But firstly, they need to realize all of their improvements wouldn't be taxed, their barns, their crops. And nextly, agricultural land is much less costly per acre than the urban centers. So they would stand to gain in a lot of ways. And overall, it would be better. Otherwise, why would we advocate for this? But you may disagree. In varying degrees is this true of all landholders. Many landholders are laborers of one sort or another, and it would be hard to find a landowner not a laborer who is not also a capitalist. While the general rule is that the larger the landowner, the greater the capitalist, so true is this that in common thought the characters are confounded. Honestly, I wish George would make this point earlier and more often in the book. The common term of landlord is so mixed with the idea of a capitalist, somebody who owns capital that they are employing and managing, and mixed with the laborer, the property manager, who makes sure things are fixed and working well and maintained on the property, with the landowner, the person who simply has the legal right to exclusive use of that land. They have the power of the sword to kick people off of it, and that is the pure landowner. But in actuality, landlords are almost always a fusing of the capitalist and the landowner and the laborer. Although big landlords, they don't labor so much. That's what their property management companies do. But they do own the structures and stuff. And yeah. So George makes this distinction here. And he, of course, we've also talked a lot about how there is this false perception of labor versus capital, when underneath it's really the landlord who pits the two against each other. And it's a mistake for them to think capital is the enemy and capital to think labor is their enemy. So true is this that in common thought the characters are confounded. Yeah, I read that. Thus, to put all taxes on the value of land, while it would be largely to reduce all great fortunes, would in no case leave the rich man penniless. The Duke of Westminster, who owns a considerable part of the site of London, is probably the richest landowner in the world. Now we have like Ted Turner and Bill Gates who own hundreds of thousands of acres. Although I do think there are certain aristocrats in the UK who own a ton of land too. To take all, there's like a de facto land ownership in tons of other parts of the world by the strong men in government. Anyway, I don't know much about that international stuff. To take all his ground rents by taxation would largely reduce his income, this is the Duke of Westminster, but would still leave him his buildings and all the income from them, and doubtless much personal property in various other shapes. He would still have all he could, by any possibility, enjoy, and a much better state of society in which to enjoy it. So would the Astors of New York remain very rich, and so I think it will be seen throughout this measure would make no one poorer but such as could be made a great deal poorer without being really hurt. It would cut down great fortunes, but it would impoverish no one. Wealth would not only be enormously increased, it would be equally distributed. His equally distributed is not like our current perception. I do not mean that each individual would get the same amount of wealth. That would not be equal distribution so long as different individuals have different powers and different desires. But I mean that wealth would be distributed in accordance with the degree in which the industry, skill, knowledge, or prudence of each contributed to the common stock. The great cause which concentrates wealth in the hands of those who do not produce, and takes it from the hands of those who do, would be gone. The inequalities that continued to exist would be those of nature, not the artificial inequalities produced by the denial of natural law. The non-producer would no longer roll in luxury, while the producer got but the barest necessities of animal existence. The monopoly of the land gone, there need be no fear of large fortunes. Ah, yes, this is what I have been talking about in the last couple Henry George daily devotionals about. We have this instinctual fear of big fortunes or presumption that they are ill-gotten, but that can pass away. For then the riches of any individual must consist of wealth, properly so called of wealth, which is the product of labor and which constantly tends to dissipation. For national debts, I imagine, would not long survive the abolition of the system from which they spring. All fear of great fortunes might be dismissed, for when everyone gets what he fairly earns, no one can get more than he fairly earns. How many men are there who fairly earn $1 million? Exactly. I don't think there was big tech in George's time. Well, you could consider railroad ownership big tech, I suppose. But it didn't rely so much on patents, But I do think patents and proprietary software are a big reason a lot of our billionaires have acquired billions of dollars. Hard to say they have fairly earned them. Well, I think I'm going to keep this short. I don't feel like starting chapter 4. Tomorrow is the Los Angeles Georgist meetup. I'll see you there. I posted a new blog post on my blog today, my Substack, which is almostinfinite.substack.com. Uh, it's about sortition, not directly about Georgism. It is an interesting concept and structure of government legislation. Yeah, I'll talk to you next week. Bye bye. What are these messages? Um, OBS recording. HDD 95, book 9, chapter 3, finished. Podcasters.sportify.com. Audience size has gone from 4 down to 3. Alright, now we need to work on a description. Um, what did we read about? Society would use space better. Farmers, farm boys, and city slickers would both prosper. The LVT would fix sprawl in the ideal ways. The farms could be closer and smaller. The city not full of tenements. The LVT would not force poverty on the landlords for they are almost always partially capitalists and laborers as well. Alright, that's good enough for government work. You, Tubi? Uploaded. Alright, all done. Alright, let's read some democracy without elections. What is this? Oh, the Paris Games. Oh, we got another like. Can I like it? What does that even do? Okay, good. Wait, now it goes down to 1. Um, Where was democracy without elections? Here we go. We were at proportional representation, part 1. Single seat winner take all plurality voting is a bit of a mouthful. It is the voting method used in the United States. Alright, I'm going to end the stream and read in silence, I guess.